what is AEMSA and what's your role as a member of AEMSA?
Sure. Well, AEMSA, the American E-Liquid Manufacturing Standards Association, is an all-volunteer group of member businesses who've kind of come together to create reasonable, realistic, and sustainable standards on the creation of e-liquid.
Well, it's really great because we've come together with, I think it was 9 charter members to start basically a regulation type setting for American e-liquid manufacturers. It's been awesome because we've been able to really combine our efforts and create a standard for the American industry that really didn't exist prior to what we were doing.
Well, as a member of AEMSA, obviously we all have a say in exactly what guidelines we believe are both important to the organization, but also ones that companies can actually meet for themselves. Obviously, we're not all multinational, multi-million-dollar corporations, so there are some real-world limitations there. But we hope that most of the guidelines that we've set are achievable by most small business owners. As a member of AEMSA, obviously we actually have a very good say in what's happening there.
We always tried from the start at Mr. E-Liquid to totally bring our lab up to spec, especially as we moved into our retail location in a commercial space. We always went with vinyl flooring, one surface or non-porous materials, NIST calibrated equipment, and with AEMSA, we really got to the next level is really what happened. We went from, say, I wouldn't say a hobby vendor, but with AEMSA, we went from having a mediocre facility to a really top-of-the-line, clean room type operation. It's really skyrocketed the feel of the company and the quality of the product that we're able to put out.
Well, when we started, it was just a few people like-minded, chatting about where they thought the industry was going to go and what they thought we could do. Since then, and it's been really less than 6 months already, we've grown by several more members. In fact, several large companies have joined us. And we've gone from simply talking about what we think is possible to actually getting in front of regulators and actually having a say in their process as well.
That's really how it grew out. The roots of it were consumer advocates, not business people, that started the group, and then businesses joined on to be represented by AEMSA in talking with the FDA, or if that should come up, or lobbying, or something like that. So it's a way, it's a 501(c) organization, so it's a nonprofit with the power to lobby if it came to that. So really, it's a way for multiple vendors to join forces and have a greater whole, or synergize, I guess is the word for it.
Right. I heard you guys had what they call a listening session with the FDA, where more or less you presented some information about your standards and kind of what you guys were working on. What were your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that was, I was very impressed by how much the FDA seemed like they wanted to listen and they wanted to learn, which is something always around the vaping community is everybody thinks the FDA is the bad guy.
Right.
Well, after coming out of that, I don't really see that as the case. The thing is, the FDA they don't have enough information on vaping or electronic cigarette use. So sitting down and having a listening session with them where they could interact, where they could ask questions, it wasn't an adversarial kind of thing. For them, it was information sharing, and it was obvious that they needed to be shared that information.
From what I heard, they invited us for a private hearing, and we prepared a 45-minute presentation. And typically, they say that you get about 15 minutes question and answer after your 45-minute presentation. And it actually turned out that they gave us an additional 45 minutes. So we got almost 2 hours of question and answer with the FDA. They had a lot of great questions from what I heard. They were asking qualitative questions,
right,
which is nice because a lot of times you think of the FDA as we don't care, just tell us, we're not going to listen anyway.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be the exact opposite of that, which was very surprising for us.
So the best thing we can do really is educate them, what refillable e-liquids are, what, this is not a normal electronic cigarette that they're used to, a stick battery type thing, that these batteries come in all shapes and sizes. There's different atomizers, there's cartomizers, there's tanks, there's refill liquid, there's pre-filled cartomizers. If they don't have all of that information, then the information they're going to hear is what is generally presented by the big manufacturers, the big name brand, the big box stores, and that's going to be pre-filled cartridges on stick batteries. Right. And being at Vape Bash, I don't think anybody in the room wants to be locked into a pre-filled cartomizer with a stick battery. But so that's probably the biggest takeaway from that listening session was it was like an epiphany to them. Like they didn't know about refillable e-liquid. They continue to ask us questions about pre-fills, and so when you say that pre-filled cartridges limit consumer choice, how do you mean? Well, to us, to people in the industry and those who use e-cigarettes, the enthusiasts, they see it's almost like an obvious question to them. But to somebody who's outside this industry, somebody walking down the street, it's not immediately obvious why you don't want to lock users into pre-filled cartomizers. The takeaway was not the FDA wants to regulate and crush it out of existence. It was that the takeaway is more people need to inform the FDA that there are other things besides stick batteries and pre-filled cartomizers. And that's one of the great things about AEMSA having the listening session was that we were able to say, look, we're manufacturers of e-liquid. Here are the standards that we produce our e-liquid by. So it's not this bathtub juice made in some dirty facility that nobody knows the quality of the liquid.
How do you feel about the future of vaping right now in general?
There are some challenges. There are certainly certain ingredients a few vendors will use and certain processes that a few are using. I really do think that it's few compared to the whole. But there are some that just are going to have to change. And that's simply a reality of the world, is that not everything that people can brew up in their kitchen is going to be allowed to be sold to the general public at large. I think that we can meet a reasonable standard of safety and purity that will allow us to keep vaping legal. I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to come to terms with the regulators on something that's going to be safe for everyone.
Thinking about the future of electronic cigarettes and regulation and all of that in general, did you feel a lot more positive about that in a general sense than when you went in?
Yes, because they listened, and that's something again that the FDA takes a lot of heat for, that they don't care about us or they don't listen to us. Well, this is an example where they did care, they did listen. There were approximately 30 odd some people that either in the room with us or on the phone. They were all FDA representatives, both from policy, regulatory, some scientists, and they listened. They asked questions, and they weren't questions like, well, why should you have flavoring, as opposed to not have flavoring. They were questions such as, can you explain more about how enthalpy works into AEMSA and how the members of the organization can send samples to enthalpy to have GCFID tested? But more like that's interesting. It felt like that's interesting that you're doing that. You're exceeding what we probably they expected us to, and so they were curious about that. Okay, tell us about your standards for how did you develop your standards, and how did you do this? How did you do this? How did you come up with the numbers of the known contaminants in the purity of the e-liquid? How did you come up with that number? How do you verify this? So it was, to them, they started seeing that refillable liquids, okay, that exists, so now start educating us about it.
Now, that doesn't mean we won't have a few hiccups. And obviously, the FDA had announced a few months ago that they were interested in announcing deeming regulation this month on e-cigarettes that would term it as a tobacco product and therefore subject to several limitations. Online sales could have been in danger there. So far, they haven't announced any of those regulations. And again, I'm just hoping here, but I hope that means that we finally got our message through to them that this is a new product that needs to be dealt with in a new way, and that maybe they're actually going to work with us to come up with that structure.
If there was one bottom line thing you would like for vapors or people who don't really know much about e-cigarettes at all to know about AEMSA and kind of what you guys are doing, how would you sum that up?
AEMSA is there basically to make sure that our industry and the vapors in our industry receive a clean product. They receive a contaminant-free product that's been manufactured in a facility that is capable of manufacturing clean and contaminant-free products.
For the average vapor, for people who know almost nothing about e-cigarettes or maybe don't even know what's in e-liquid to begin with, what's one thing that you would want them to know kind of about AEMSA and about what you guys are doing for e-cigarettes in general?
Well, visit the website, aemsa.org. We openly publish the standards. Anybody can read them. They can see that there's chemicals that we prohibit. As members, we've agreed to prohibit those items from e-liquid, like diacetyl, which is common in many flavorings, many food flavorings. Diacetyl is generally regarded as safe for consumption, but not for inhalation. And that's something that, especially people that are starting to get into the DIY, maybe they're making liquids for themselves, need to be aware of that some of the flavorings can be hazardous. Just a general e-cig user, not a lot of experience. What can they take out of AEMSA? Well, they can just look at the standards and say that there is a group that is interested in forming some kind of standardized method or safety standards or protocols or something like that. AEMSA really is for the members. It's not an end user focused organization. It's a trade association. But there is plenty of information there for any vapor to go and read, and we encourage them to.